To reduce uncertainty in the system.
There are two ways in which a state can get in a capitalistic system. One is regulation, and the other is active policy measures, monetary policy and fiscal policy. Would you, the conservative thinking is that at most government should take a role in regulation, but absolutely no role whatsoever in monetary policy, exchange policy, and fiscal policy.
Well, well, of course, they've had to retreat a little bit because once the economy started to collapse in 2008, everyone suddenly became a Keynesian to some extent. They said, well, yes, even Robert Lucas said, when we're in the hole, we're all Keynesians. But as soon as, and so there was massive government intervention to stop the slide into another Great Depression, which was up to a point successful, though it hasn't brought about any recovery. But as soon as the immediate crisis was over, normal intellectual service was resumed. And all these conservatives said, now the government must withdraw the stimulus as soon as possible because otherwise they'll go bankrupt. And so you have this huge pressure now, even when there's very, very little recovery, evidence of recovery. There's a bit more in America. Of course, in China and India, there are strong signs of recovery, but these economies are still too small to lift the world out of a depression. So the conservatives say you must withdraw the stimulus. And I think this is the big debate going on. There's enormous pressure on governments from the markets. The very same markets that got us into this mess are now bringing huge pressure on the governments. The markets do not like government policy. And if this continues, the stimulus, then, of course, we will abort the recovery. And I think governments have to resist this. But it'll take a lot of political courage for them to do it, because this is the dominant vested interest in our system, is the financial system. And they tremble before market sentiment, and they look at bond prices, and if there are any spikes, even temporary ones, they say, the markets are losing confidence. We've seen this now in Greece, but it'll spread to other Mediterranean countries.
Sorry, to resist up to what point? I mean, you can't resist forever. You can't go on forever spending, and we are still seeing a fiscal crisis all over the world, not only in Europe.
Well, I agree, but the fiscal crisis is largely the result of the fall in revenues of the government as a result of the slump. You see, in the Eurozone, output on the whole is 4 or 5% lower than it was before the start of the crisis. In Britain it's a bit higher than that, it's about 6% lower. And that means there's a fall in government revenues. There's also an automatic increase in expenditure while this is going on, because you have to support more unemployed and other people who can't cope with the crisis. So you get an automatic widening of the fiscal deficit. As recovery starts, the revenues will increase again, and faster than output because of the way most tax systems are arranged, and the expenditure will automatically decrease. This is without any change in policy. Now, that's not enough. I agree. That won't automatically restore the whole fiscal position, because many governments in the Eurozone and also in Britain started the crisis with unsound fiscal positions. And yet, when I say that, I also look at the unemployment figures at the height of the boom. And I notice that they're very, very high compared to the old types of... For example, in Britain, there were already 1.8 million unemployed, which is 6%, 5 or 6%, before the crisis started. And I think the Eurozone proportions were great. So,
if I may interject here, I think if one has preoccupation with the level of public debt of single individual European countries, then why not have an issue of bonds by the European Union and use those bonds, the proceeds of those bonds, to finance infrastructure, investment, expenditure all over Europe. So if there is no room for regional indebtedness. Why not having the European Union as a federal state, so to speak, as a common institution for Europe, take some of the responsibility of bringing the system out of the hole of Mr. Lucas. This is my preoccupation with the euro and with the setup of the European Union. My position has been traditionally, Robert, you know this many years, I always said it's a politically important factor to build a common currency in Europe is the sign that Europe wants to be united. But in order to have a strong currency, you need to have a treasury. And what I don't see is the treasury. In other words, political union is a prerequisite or a requisite of a successful monetary union. We have the monetary union, we don't have the political union, which is the condition for. And nowadays we would need a treasury which would encourage recovery in Europe, because as you said, unemployment is very high, GDP is falling, exports are falling, so it's a very serious situation.
Yeah, this is a lesson that perhaps will be learned as a result of this crisis. But the fact is we don't have a European treasury, therefore we cannot issue European bonds because we don't have an agency that can do it.
They could do it
if they cooperated. But in the next year, what are we going to do without a treasury? And I think that is the issue. And I don't know. I think what the strong European countries have to do, the ones which have healthy positions, they have to be prepared to back, on terms, of course, the weak ones, the ones with weak fiscal positions.
You mean Germany? You mean Germany and France?
Or if they're not prepared to, there's the IMF. And the IMF is quite experienced in these bailout situations. I think it's the IMF, and everyone says, well, it's a terrible humiliation to have to go to the IMF. Britain went to the IMF in 1976 and got a big. Italy's been to the. There's one interesting fact about Greece which amazed me. When I read it in this new book by Ken Rogoff, which examines all the financial statistics. Greece, since its independence, has been in default 50% of the time. Every other year, there's been a default on the Greek debt. So, of course, markets have got a point when they doubt these consolidation measures that have been announced by Greece. And Italy is defaulted from time to time, but not nearly as much as that. And
they've never defaulted.
Yeah, it has. According to Rogoff, it's defaulted.
When we were forced to suspend the exchange rate in 1870.
What does
I've got these figures somewhere.
What does Ken Rogoff mean by default? Because Italy never declared moratoria on that. Not even in the.
I think
before the First World War.
I think by default, probably that it had to refinance its debt.
What we did during the fascist period, it was consolidated twice. Twice consolidation. Forced consolidation. Well,
maybe he counts that as a default.
Well, that is 8 years ago. Now, let me